The cloud builds again into the afternoon, particularly across parts of the Midlands, Wales, Northern England and Southern Scotland. And once more, the odd shower is possible. But for the vast majority, sunny spells, certainly a brighter day in many spots, and a warmer day. 19 or 20 Celsius is possible somewhere like London or Cambridge, and those mid to high teens extend up towards Northern England and Southern Scotland. Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland seeing low teens. Into Tuesday evening, we'll see clear spells once again, and that leads us on to a sunny day on Wednesday, virtually across the board. A bit more cloud in the north on Thursday and Friday.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues that we need to be looking at in depth. Keeping me company today is Christopher Hope, Associate Political Editor at The Daily Telegraph and good friend of this show. Here's what we've got coming up. As the bombardment of Ukraine continues, Russia is accused of genocide and war crimes. I'll get an eyewitness account of what's happening from a former Royal Marine commando in Kiev. And each day brings more bad news about fuel bills, petrol prices and the cost of food. For some, it's getting so bad that they have to skip meals to make ends meet. But should that really be happening in the world's 5th largest economy? Plus, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe speaks about her newfound freedom and criticises the government for the length of time it took to happen. I'll be asking what was behind the deal that freed her from an Iranian jail. That's what we're talking about for the next hour, but what do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course you can tweet us at GBNews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB Newsroom. Freed British Iranian Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has thanked those involved in her release after spending 6 years detained in Iran, but she refused to thank the Foreign Secretary. Speaking for the first time publicly since being released, she questioned why it took 5 Secretaries of State for her to be freed. She also said the meaning of freedom to her will not be complete until Morad Tabaz and other dual nationals are released and reunited with their families. The British Iranian landed back in Britain last Thursday after the UK finally agreed to settle a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s.
I was told many times that, oh, we're going to get you home. That never happened. So there was a time that I felt like, do you know what? I'm like, no, I'm not even going to trust you because I've been told many times that I'm going to be taken home. But that never happened. I mean, how many foreign secretaries does it take for someone to come home? 5? It should have been one of them eventually. So now here we are. What's happened now should have happened 6 years ago.
Ukraine has refused to surrender in the port city of Mariupol, which has been surrounded by Russian forces since the early days of the invasion. Russia had given fighters in the city until 5 a.m. to lay down their weapons in exchange for safe passage out, but they refused. Thousands of residents are trapped with little food, power or water. The city is facing continued bombardment, but a Russian-backed separatist leader in eastern Ukraine said it would take more than a week to take control of Mariupol. That's according to Russian news agency Interfax. President Volodymyr Zelensky says an art school where hundreds of women and children were hiding had been shelled.
People were using it as a hiding place from bombardments. There were no military positions there. There were about 400 people there, peaceful people, mostly women and children and elderly people. They are now under rubble. We don't know how many people have survived, but we do know that we will shoot down the pilots who dropped the bomb, like we have already shot down nearly 100 other mass murderers.
Meanwhile, at least 8 people have been killed after a missile hit a shopping centre in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. A video from Ukraine's State Emergency Service shows a huge blast in the northwest suburbs of the city. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko has said shelling hit residential houses and a shopping district. He has since announced a 35-hour curfew in Kyiv from tonight. The UK's Ministry of Defence says Russian forces advancing on the city have stalled and the bulk of soldiers remain more than 25 kilometres away. State media in China are reporting there are no sign of survivors from an airliner that crashed in the country with 132 people on board. The Boeing 737 jet crashed into mountains in the southern province of Guangxi, causing a fire on the mountainside. Media have quoted firefighters as saying there was no sign of life among the scattered debris. China Eastern Airlines says the cause of the crash is under investigation. A man on trial for the murder of MP Sir David Amess had researched and planned potential attacks on other politicians, including the home of Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, a court has heard today. The Conservative MP for Southend West was meeting with constituents in a church building in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex last October when he was fatally stabbed. Ali Harbi Ali has appeared at the Old Bailey and denies the allegations of murder and preparing terrorist acts. Downing Street has blamed Russia for being behind hoax calls which targeted senior members of the UK cabinet. The Home Secretary and Defence Secretary both spoke to imposters posing as the Ukrainian Prime Minister, while an unsuccessful attempt was also made to Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary. It's thought the attempts were made in the hope of securing sensitive or embarrassing information. Protests are taking place in London against the sacking of 800 P&O Ferries workers. Labour is forcing an emergency vote in Parliament today, which they hope will outlaw fire and rehire practices after the operator replaced staff with cheaper agency workers. The government has urged P&O Ferries to pause the changes and says it's examining the contracts it holds with them. Shadow Defence Minister Stephanie Peacock told GB News the government needs to intervene.
There is a question about whether it is legal. We want the government to shine light on that, but we also want to make sure that this simply cannot happen again because it is absolutely outrageous. And we need to be clear that the government can take action. They can sanction the company and they can sanction the parent company, the Dubai-based parent company that have posted billions of pounds worth of profits in the last year.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Back to We Need to Talk About with Alex Phillips.
It is a sad fact of the human condition that we tragically become desensitised to horror. As shellings intensify on Ukraine and more indiscriminate tactics are adopted by invading forces, war fatigue is setting in, and once shocking headlines are slipping down news agendas abroad. Meanwhile, 10 million Ukrainians are estimated to have been displaced, cities rubblized, families torn apart, with countless men forced to conscribe, many terrified and trapped in a brutal conflict without training or sufficient weaponry. Front pages today talk of genocide, with allegations too that Russia is shipping Ukrainians from besieged cities into forced labour. The citizens of Mariupol have been told to surrender or face obliteration, without detail of quite what that may entail. Optimistic reports of Russia's military struggle may be a myopic precursor to deadlier devastation to come. While Western intelligence suggests both sides have lost a tenth of their capabilities, Russia's numerical toll is far higher, but so too is the country's capacity to double down. I'm joined now by Mircea Barbu, a journalist who has been in Ukraine since the beginning of the invasion. Mircea, it's great to have you back. What's the latest you're getting on the ground from inside Ukraine?
So I'm on my way out of the capital city, Kiev, and I was there today, joined by some British volunteers who are taking animals from the front line to safe shelters in Romania and then onwards to places in Europe and Great Britain. Today we heard very close to us a very large explosion. Not sure if it was a rocket or an IED, but it was quite close, and it was the loudest I've heard in weeks reporting from Ukraine. And this was in the city capital of Kiev. Just happened about 4 hours and a half ago.
It seems to me that we've all been poised to see what the fate of Kiev will be, with that convoy of tanks now finally encircling the city. But as yet, no moves, and not remotely the devastation we've seen in cities such as Mariupol, where I believe up to about 90% of buildings now have undergone some sort of shelling. There are still a lot of citizens in Kiev.
So I've been driving in Kiev. This is the second time I've been back in the last 5 days in Kiev, and I've seen streets, large boulevards that I remember from years ago visiting Ukraine as a journalist, packed with people, packed with cars. They're now empty. But however, that doesn't mean everyone is gone. We've seen people queuing at ATMs at banks this morning. Some residents are staying behind to help animals or to help the elderly and the ones who cannot defend themselves or cannot evacuate.
And in terms of things such as, we might have lost Mircea there. Mircea, can you still hear us?
I can hear you just fine, yes.
Sorry about that, Mircea. We thought we'd lost you. Now, in terms of things like the flow of food and water into the cities, I mean, cities like Mariupol have essentially been placed into a stranglehold to deliberately, it seems, cut them off from vital supplies and push the population towards starvation, into desperation. What about in Kiev? Are people still able to access groceries in shops and get drinking water?
For the most part, they can, but it's very limited. People are queuing at shops, ATMs, and gas stations to buy the fuel they need. It's limited to 20 liters per person at the moment, and including in Kiev, and bread to 2 loaves of bread per person. In the capital city, as I said, there are large queues, and I've seen them the day before when I was here, and today as well. And for the most part, yes, there are still services running, such as electricity and water, but they are severely limited at the moment.
And what about those people who are trying to defend places like Kiev? I mean, so many of the people who make up the Ukraine resistance forces are just everyday citizens, men between the ages of 18 and 60 who cannot leave the country. What is their mood like? I mean, are these men ready and willing? Do you have terrified conscripts? How well armed are they and prepared?
Well, this is a very good question, because it's the people we as journalists meet most often, people at checkpoints. I've seen teenagers, and I've seen people who are well into their 60s or 70s sometimes, with different types of guns, from hunting rifles to even guns that to me didn't really look real. However, compared to 2 or 3 weeks ago when the war started, people are less stressed or less jumpy when they see a foreign car or they hear a foreign accent. For the most part, they're polite and professional, given that they don't have any military training. But however, they're highly suspicious of anyone entering or exiting cities, including Kiev. They do check your passports. They do check your press cards or accreditations if you're an NGO worker. They look around the car, but for the most part, they're being very polite and calm, and that to me is very admirable given the level of stress they're facing at the moment.
Yeah, Murcha, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to catch up with you again. Stay safe and let's speak again very soon.
Thank you.
Murcha Babu, who's a freelance journalist in Ukraine and who's been on this show a number of times, reporting to us on the ground what is going on there. Well, joining me now is a filmmaker and former Royal Marine Commander Emil Gessen, who's currently in Kiev. Emil, can you give us a sense of the current situation from what you've seen?
Yeah, hello. So I've been in Kiev now for about 3 weeks, and the situation's getting a lot more tense in Kiev. The city's encircled to the north and to the west, and the Russians are moving up to the east. You can hear, you probably won't be able to hear it, but I can hear bombing going off to the north. And there you go, the siren goes off there. Perfect timing. So the siren there means there's potentially going to be an air attack that's about to come in. So the city is coming under bombardment. Like last night, there was a drone flying over, a lot of anti-aircraft guns, but really the Russians are trying to squeeze Kiev at the moment.
And you've been following as well British volunteers who have joined the fight. How many have you met?
Siren.
Yeah, no, that's what comes with live reporting from inside a war zone. If you can still hear me, you have been following British volunteers who have joined the fight. I mean, how many are there out there, and what's compelled them to go?
Say that again, sorry, because I can't hear the siren.
Yeah, we're talking about the British volunteers who've gone over to Ukraine to join the resistance. I mean, what has compelled these people to go, and what sort of things are they doing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of British volunteers that have come out here, a lot of foreign fighters. I've made 2 previous documentaries on foreign fighters, and I'm seeing the same kind of characters that are coming out. Lots of guys who have fought in Syria, a lot of former military men, and some guys who've got no previous experience in the military that come in here. There's about 20,000. Some of their locations where they're based have been targeted by the Russians because their operational security has been quite open, so they've been targeting them. So quite a few of them have actually gone home rather than stay out here now.
Emil, I must ask, are you safe where you are, or do you need to go and find some sort of shelter?
I'm good for the time being. I'm just listening to see if I can hear anything land.
You make sure that you are, please. So what are your thoughts so far on the EU and NATO response? People like you going over there voluntarily into a war zone. Do you think that we should be doing more?
Yeah, so I apologise. The siren's going, it's too loud, I can't hear you.
Yeah,
I think at the moment is the Russians very much want to squeeze the city. Obviously, they're hitting to the east very hard in Mariupol, like you spoke about a minute ago. It's under siege. People can't get out. People can't get in. It's a tough one for reinforcements in that region there. Putin obviously wanted surrender. Ukrainians refused to surrender and continue fighting in that region. But really, at the moment, the Russian military has been stalled because their logistics is very poor. The morale amongst the Russian troops is very low. Speaking to a lot of civilians, I've been up in Irpin area, and a lot of the civilians are saying the soldiers are in their houses scrounging around looking for food. There's not enough food within the Russian military to supply them. I had one mother who was telling me that the Russian soldiers were apologising to her, saying, we don't want to fight this war. Putin's making us and our commanders are making us. So really, lots of reports coming out that the Russian morale is very low, logistics is slow, and that's why this war is going probably not in their favour. And that's luckily the siren stopped.
And Emil, could I hear in the distance there any sort of sound of artillery fire as well?
So you can hear in the distance, I can hear bombs going outgoing and incoming. So you hear it quite often. Generally, the Russians like attacking at night. So you showed the footage of the shopping mall that they attacked last night, which they presume killed about 8. When I was up there earlier, there was about 6 bodies, so there's 2 missing still. But yeah, very much so. They're bombing constantly, and it's getting heavier. We're hearing a lot more gunfire now in the city. Normally, it was up to the north. It's encroaching closer to the central part of the city. So, they are getting closer, but at a slow rate.
Emil, thank you ever so much. I'm going to let you get on with the things you need to get on with. It's been an absolute honour having you on the programme.
Much appreciated.
I'm joined, of course, by Christopher Hope, who is Associate Political Editor at The Telegraph. Christopher, I mean, what evocative noises. You can hear that sort of rumble in the background of some sort of shelling and that siren going off. And it really brings home how critical the situation still is. And there's Boris Johnson saying that he wants to go to Kiev.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure what his team thought when they saw that report in the Daily Mail today, because, of course, it's a massive security risk having any leader go to Kiev. But you can see why he wants to go. It really has been almost the making of Boris Johnson. He has got his, he's found a role for Britain on the international stage. You know, we sit well in NATO. The European Union is doing its bit. We sit outside that. We're a friend of the US. I mean, he is having a good war, and his critics won't like that, but he is having a good war. And since he's leading this country, he's articulating, I think, this idea of freedom. And he certainly made that speech, didn't he, in the spring conference at the weekend. So I think, he wants to go out there. He wants to try and be more involved. But how much we're involved? We can't get involved in terms of getting involved militarily in Ukraine because it's not part of NATO. So we're slightly hamstrung by watching it, appalled by it. It's in Europe. It shouldn't be happening, and trying to squeeze Russia as much as possible.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, do you think we've now run out of road? We're still getting daily fresh appeals from President Zelensky for more help, that no-fly zone he's been talking about. You can understand why he's desperately asking for support on that still. But is there a fear now that this is beginning to fall out of headlines in newspapers in the UK, and that we are going to become acclimatised to this conflict?
I certainly hope not. I think the journalism is keeping it going. That guy there you interviewed there, I mean, such bravery, I think, talking to you during an air raid, a warning going off. We've seen in the Telegraph, we have all sorts of colleagues out in Ukraine. It's the photographs, it's the reporting which is keeping it live, and people are so shocked by it. We want to do something in this country. On the diplomatic stage, maybe the United Nations holds a different way in. NATO is a defensive body, so it will do things if attacked. But the UN could be a way forward. That's certainly been raised recently by Ukraine MPs in Parliament last week.
Yeah, Christopher, thank you ever so much. You are with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A cloudier day compared to what many of us saw at the weekend, but staying bright and dry for most of us, and it will be a little warmer in the south as well. Areas of cloud are moving in from the west and from the south. That cloud thick enough in 1 or 2 spots to give the odd shower, for example, through parts of Wales and the Midlands. But for the vast majority, it's dry. Despite the extra cloud in the sky, it's bright, and temperatures higher in the south compared to the weekend, 15 to 17 or even 18 Celsius, Cardiff to London. I think more like low teens further north for Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Then through the evening, a few showers arriving from the south. They'll be very hit and miss. Most places will miss them, and they'll be fleeting anyway where they do occur. Away from the showers, there'll be a few clear spells, especially towards the northeast where a touch of frost is possible, and 1 or 2 fog patches in 1 or 2 spots as we start off Tuesday. But otherwise, it stays fine. High pressure is sitting to the east and low pressure to the west, and that's how things remain effectively through the rest of the week. So generally, that means that it's going to stay fine and increasingly sunny once again once Tuesday's early showers have pushed away. The cloud builds again into the afternoon, particularly across parts of the Midlands, Wales, Northern England and Southern Scotland. And once more, the odd shower is possible. But for the vast majority, sunny spells, certainly a brighter day in many spots, and a warmer day. 19 or 20 Celsius is possible somewhere like London or Cambridge, and those mid to high teens extend up towards Northern England and Southern Scotland. Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland seeing low teens. Into Tuesday evening, we'll see clear spells once again, and that leads us on to a sunny day on Wednesday, virtually across the board. A bit more cloud in the north on Thursday and Friday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. The just about managings, the squeezed middle, a cost of living crisis. Throwaway phrases we are fast becoming used to ahead of the Chancellor's spring budget on Wednesday, where Rishi Sunak has to pull a fiscal rabbit from the Treasury hat to stave off what is going to be one of the toughest periods for families in decades. The post-pandemic recovery was already testing the Exchequer's ledger, having spent more in a couple of years than the whole of World War II. Now, measures to bring the nation's balance sheet back into some semblance of manageability are being thwarted by a spiralling fuel crisis and looming inflation, triggered in part by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent sanctions imposed. But this isn't going to be about whether the family holiday has to be cancelled. For households up and down the country, the choices will be far harder than that. Choices many didn't think citizens of the world's fifth largest economy would have to make in the 21st century. But joining me now on the show is the head of lifestyle economics at the IEA, Christopher Snowdon. Christopher, great to have you on. I mean, the Chancellor's faced with some choices, isn't he, to try and put a package together that will see those really under the cosh in this looming economic crisis alleviated from some pain. But what do you think he can do to make life a bit easier for those at the bottom?
Well, he can do one of two things. He can either get some welfare payments out to people, try and target them at people on lowest incomes, or he can cut taxes. I would lean towards cutting taxes, partly because welfare system is a very leaky bucket. It's quite an inefficient way of saving people money, whereas tax cuts are actually quite a easy and efficient way. The obvious one to tax, obvious tax to cut, as has been mentioned in the press the last 24 hours, is fuel duty. There's rumours of a 5p cut in that. He could potentially get rid of VAT on fuel. I mean, there are a lot of taxes he could cut. The tax burden in this country is the highest it's been for very many decades. But regardless of which of those two you do, you're still faced with the problem that you haven't got any money. And so you have the same problem either way. Either you borrow more money to give people handouts, or you borrow money to make up for the fact that you're losing tax revenue.
Yeah, the Chancellor's definitely not in an enviable position, but how much can we forgive him for the crisis currently facing the UK, considering there was an unprecedented pandemic and considering Russia's invasion of Ukraine is certainly a huge contributory factor into things like rising fuel prices and inflation?
Yeah, I mean, what's happened is fairly predictable. I mean, many people, including ourselves at the IEA, were saying when the government was dishing out all the money over the course of the pandemic that this is going to lead to inflation. We've been printing most of the money we've been, quote, borrowing. But of course, you're right. I mean, what was the alternative? There were probably some things that could have been done. Maybe we could have cut down on the enormous amount of fraud that was involved in the system, for example. But we've had two very difficult periods in a row. I think people accept that our solidarity with the Ukraine is going to involve us having to make some sacrifices, and that putting the economy on hold for months on end during the pandemic is going to lead to some pain later on down the line. The trouble is people aren't really used to pain economically. And whenever there's a problem, the government is expected to step in and sort it out, usually with borrowed money. But that is coming to an end. We are £2.3 trillion in debt. The debt interest payments alone in January were £6 billion. I think in December they were £8 billion. These are only going to go up as interest rates go up, as inflation goes up also. So there is no magic money tree. We've done our best to shake it over the course of not just the last couple of years, but actually the last 20 years. We haven't run a surplus since 2001. The party is over. There is no easy solution to this. There's pain whichever way you go.
And how bad is that pain going to be? There have been some sort of apocalyptic headlines suggesting we may end up back in 1973 with a 3-day week. People talking quite sanguinely about families being faced with the choice about who they can feed around the dinner table. How bad do you think things are going to get?
Well, people will not be as poor as they were in the 1970s. We need to be fairly clear about that. I mean, real average incomes have well over doubled since the 1970s. People, of course, aren't ready to have their lifestyles cut back to anything like 1970s levels. And any kind of reduction in living standards hurts people, of course it does. But we shouldn't try and confuse the current situation with that kind of poverty. But yeah, we're looking at inflation about 8%, I think, possibly going to double figures at some point this year. There is a quite high likelihood, I think, of some sort of wage price spiral, which is to say people are going to be demanding, quite understandably, higher wages to make up for all this inflation. And if that happens, how do businesses pay higher wages? They have to put the prices up. And so you get into this vicious cycle. That's what happened in the 70s. That's a big worry. But if that doesn't happen, all it means is that the inflation is eating away at people's wages. So if you want to see that as the better of the two options, and objectively, I think probably economists would say it's better to avoid a wage price spiral, then the very least you're going to get is everybody's living standards going down and their money going less far. We just have to hope that this inflation is relatively transitory. We've got to keep our fingers crossed for all sorts of reasons that the war in Ukraine is resolved peacefully quite soon. And if that happens, then it's conceivable that the energy price surge that we've had will be largely alleviated by the time we get to autumn, which is, of course, when we really need to be using all these fossil fuels, and particularly gas.
Christopher Snowdon, thanks ever so much. Going back to Christopher Hope, what do you think about what the Chancellor's going to have to do on Wednesday? I mean, poor Rishi Sunak, he's thrown in at the deep end every time, isn't he? Just ahead of the pandemic, now with this sort of really unpredictable fuel crisis we're having. And we're hearing of a lot of divisions again between number 10 and number 11.
Yeah, he's got to do something on the cost of living crisis. That's what everyone's worrying about. Like Christopher Snowdon there eloquently talking about the issue of inflation, double digit by maybe the third quarter this year. We're looking at massive. Well, the big issue now is where will the energy cap go in October, let alone the one coming up next month. So huge bills going up all over the place, and that's the big worry. What can Rishi do? Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, the 5p off a litre of petrol, maybe fiddle with the thresholds of national insurance, one idea. But either way, it's going to be really hard next few months. People will have to decide whether, it won't be like holidays, as you say. It's going to be much more existential for some families, and that's the worry. But, not as bad as the 70s, as Christopher said, I think.
There have been a lot of reports in newspapers that there are lots of people in the Conservative Party, perhaps Sunak himself, who wants to wash his hands of the rise in national insurance. But how else is he going to get that money? He's going to have to go ahead with this, isn't he?
The key thing, well, he always didn't like something called a hypothecated tax, which is what this is meant to be. It's meant to be ring-fenced, the NHS, for the first 3 years, and then from then onwards into social care. Whether that actually happens, I don't know. Often you have these levies imposed on us all by the Treasury, say on food, on healthy eating, which become a kind of a levy which goes back into the pot, and that's the problem. So they want to try and strip it out on pay slips to say this is your money you're paying for the NHS, but but how much can we keep accepting this? The big worry is that NIC increase might become a battleground of the next election. Labour might try and put up even more than the Tories have.
An election that might even be called early, if some reports are to be believed.
I don't believe that. I think it's May 24. I mean, I spoke to Oliver Dowden last week for my podcast, and he says they are targeting 2024, probably May, maybe October. The problem is they can't use these new boundaries that come in July 2023 until November 2023, and that's a net gain of around 10 seats for the Tories. May 24, October 24 is my bet.
Christopher, thank you. What do you think about that? We did, of course, talk about the possible looming election in 2024. Will you vote for the Conservatives again? Do you blame them for the cost of living crisis? How bad are things in your household? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us @gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, we'll be crossing to Westminster, where a protest is being held against the decision by P&O Ferries to sack hundreds of British workers. Now, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thanks, Alex. It's 2:33. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Freed British Iranian Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has thanked those involved in her release after spending 6 years detained in Iran. But she refused to thank the Foreign Secretary. Speaking for the first time publicly since being released, she questioned why it took 5 secretaries of state for her to be freed. Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe landed back in Britain last week after the UK finally agreed to settle a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s. A Chinese airliner with 132 people on board has crashed in the mountains after a sudden descent from cruising altitude. State media in China report there are no sign of survivors. The Boeing 737 jet crashed in the southern province of Guangxi, causing a fire on the mountainside. China Eastern Airlines say the cause of the crash is under investigation. Protesters are taking place in London against the sacking of 800 P&O Ferries workers. Labour is forcing an emergency vote in Parliament today, which they hope will outlaw fire and rehire practices after the operator replaced staff with cheaper agency workers. The government has urged P&O Ferries to pause the changes and says it's examining the contracts it holds with them. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to We Need to Talk About with Alex Phillips.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The sudden sacking of 800 staff at P&O to be replaced by cheaper agency workers may have been described as awful by the Chancellor, but the question is whether it was lawful. The shock news has been met with vitriol by unions representing crew, while government ministers chastised the decision, saying they would review all contracts with the firm. However, it has emerged that the Department of Transport was informed of the plans and failed to voice any concerns. The Labour Party have called on Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng to take legal action against the firm, which received millions in taxpayer support during the pandemic, pointing to legislation that demands employers who wish to make more than 100 people redundant must notify the Business Secretary in advance and give workers at least 45 days' notice. Yet, the Dubai-based owner of P&O, DP World, is also responsible for delivering UK free ports, often cited as a big Brexit dividend, which could collectively help to create more than 45,000 jobs. Well, a protest against the sackings is being held in Westminster. Ellie Costello is there for us. Ellie, feelings are still running very high over these sackings.
Hi, Alex. Yes, feelings are running very high this afternoon, Alex. We've just come down from Victoria outside the DP World offices. That is the parent company of P&O Ferries. About 400 people have come out today. These are RMT unionists. You can see some of them behind me. You can see some of the signs saying save P&O jobs, nationalise. Now we've got people with drums here, with flags and banners. Many of them were sacked from their jobs last Thursday. It was in a pre-recorded Zoom message, if you can believe, lasting about 2 minutes, telling 800 people that their jobs had gone, effective immediately. They have now been replaced with cheaper foreign agency labour, and these people have now got no jobs. They are turning up outside the Houses of Parliament, where there will be a vote brought by Labour this afternoon to get DP World's contracts suspended and to call for P&O to reverse their decision. Well, let me bring in Lee, who was sacked by P&O last Thursday on that Zoom call. Lee, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Try and describe me, if you can, how you felt on Thursday knowing that your job had been taken.
Devastated, numb, angry not just for myself but for my colleagues who all lost their jobs.
And describe how that was done for you. It was on a pre-recorded Zoom message, not lasting very long at all.
Yeah, we received an email from the company to log on to a Zoom, and we thought it would be like an open meeting. Instead, it was a recorded message from the new HR director, who went ahead and told us that as of today we're no longer employed, our contracts are terminated, and we would be receiving a redundancy offer.
And how long have you worked for P&O?
I've been 30 years in August.
You've worked for a company for 30 years and your job was taken away from you in just one day? Yeah,
straight from school and then straight onto the ferries. We were told it was a job for life. Second generation seafarer, my father was a seafarer. And now obviously the rug's been pulled from under us. We've been replaced by agency labour from Ukraine, from Romania, from Poland and India on exploitative rates of pay. Indian seafarers on as low as $1,600 a month, working 8 weeks on, 8 weeks off, even though the company itself carried out a fatigue study in 2013 that said there was enough issues with week on, week off, and that 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off was not viable.
So you've got massive concerns about safety, haven't you, for these people that are replacing you? As you just heard there, Indian workers on as little as $2.38 an hour. It's hard to imagine how this is even going to be safe, Lee.
Well, it's not going to be safe. We've got guys on there from Latvia that are training them that aren't experienced enough themselves. We're getting reports that masters are calling up ex-chief officers to ask how the BA sets were. Now, the last thing we want, a few weeks ago, I was at the 35th Memorial for the Herald of Free Enterprise. The last thing this town or this country needs is another maritime disaster.
And Lee, just very finally, very briefly, what are you calling for here today outside the House of Parliament?
We need political support, political will to get, first of all, P&O's ships impounded, to remove all government contracts from DP World, and to get support from myself and my colleagues here. We've done nothing wrong. We were sacked for what? For being loyal, for doing our jobs? This can't be right.
Lee, thank you very much for speaking to us this afternoon. I really do hope that you can have your job reinstated. Well, you heard there Alex Lee, who'd worked for P&O for 30 years, had the job taken from underneath his feet on Thursday. As you can see, this protest is taking place behind us. I can see Jeremy Corbyn actually in the front of this crowd here. They are putting pressure on the government to suspend all of DP World's contracts. Labour is pushing for a vote, an emergency vote this afternoon, calling for three things: to outlaw fire and rehire contracts, to suspend all contracts with DP World, and to remove it from the Transport Advisory Group. And we'll see how that goes this afternoon, Alex.
Ellie, thank you ever so much. Christopher, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, many would see this as a product of globalisation, the very globalisation that this government wants to harness post-Brexit by creating free ports, a few of which, of course, are now going to be developed by DP World, the owner of P&O Ferries. What can the government do? Are their hands tied over this?
It's limited, isn't it? I mean, I think it's not just a Jeremy Corbyn issue. It's felt acutely by the Tories. I saw Natalie Elphicke at the weekend marching through Dover, being yelled at by people there. She's concerned about people living in Dover. Lee bravely speaking out there, a member of the RMT. I mean, I'm not sure what they can do. They can do what it almost seems extraordinary, doesn't it, to be sacked overnight, but immediately on a Zoom call, a recorded Zoom call. There must be a way of getting around this. I think the issue may be that DP World is flagged outside of the EU and the UK, so it can't really be touched. But it does seem, I think that the PR battle is lost for P&O. If they care about the summer season coming up, there could be a consumer boycott they've got to deal with, people trying to go away. Well, will they want to go away with P&O? I doubt it, given the way they behave towards their own staff. It's hard to know what to do. Can they reclaim money handed to them, the millions you mentioned there earlier, handed through the furlough scheme? I don't know. But they are looking at all levers, all levers in Whitehall right now on what to do.
I mean, the optics of this, as you said, incredibly horrible to look at with that pre-recorded Zoom message. But this isn't the first time we'll have domestic workforces replaced by cheaper foreign labour. And we saw that, indeed, in the shortage of lorry drivers during the pandemic. How on earth does the government, when it comes to a levelling up strategy, get on top of that and do what the Labour Party are calling for and preventing this happening?
I saw reported an increase in fruit picking wages by about 40%, as the government is trying to support the local workforce to go to pick fruit rather than bring in people from overseas to do the same work. That's the point of Brexit. It will take years to transition to this higher wage economy, but the idea is to try and support people on lower wages to get better jobs and higher paid jobs. But this is not the answer. What P&O did is across the board condemned. I think it's an open door in terms of pushing for more action from the government.
Yeah, pretty horrific for those people who've lost their jobs. What do you think about this story? Do you think something needs to be done to give these workers their jobs back? And this is about time a government cracked down on such cynical behaviours by big business. Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Now, the trial of an alleged terrorist who's accused of murdering Sir David Amess is underway. The Conservative MP for Southend West was killed during a constituency surgery in October. Let's talk to GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White, who joins us from the Old Bailey. Mark, what's been said so far?
Well, it's just over 5 months since Sir David Amess was killed in his constituency surgery inside a Methodist church in Leigh-on-Sea. 15th of October, in fact, in 2001. And now the man accused of killing the Conservative MP is in the dock facing trial here in court number 2 at the Old Bailey. Harvey Ali denies murder and denies another charge related to the preparation of terrorist acts. Now, the preparation of acts of terrorism relate to a plot that, according to the prosecution here, was a long time in the making, several years in fact. He bought, according to the prosecution, the murder weapon some 5 years before the killing of Sir David Amess. He had also, again according to the prosecution, been researching other Conservative MPs, including Mike Freer, Conservative MP, and Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, researching them and their home addresses, again with a view perhaps, according to the prosecution, to carrying out a terrorist attack. Now, on this day, on the 15th of October last year, Ali Harbi Ali left his home in Kentish Town to travel down to Leigh-on-Sea to carry out that attack in the constituency surgery. As I say, that was taking place inside a Methodist church hall. He'd sat down opposite Sir David Amos, who was questioning him about why he was there and what he was there to see him about, when he then said apparently sorry and began, according to the prosecution, stabbing Sir David Amos. According to Tom Little, QC for the Crown, he said this was nothing less than an assassination for terrorist purposes. It is a crime to which we say he has no defence. Mr. Little said that this is a case involving a cold and calculated murder, a murder carried out in a place of worship, a murder carried out because of a warped and twisted and violent ideology. Now, that warped and twisted ideology, the motivation, according to the Crown, was the bombing of Syria. That is what he said on a number of occasions, allegedly inside this Methodist church hall immediately after stabbing Sir David Amos. We were told, in terms of the police response, that of course this is Essex, it's not central London. There aren't an abundance of armed police units, so the first police officers to get to the scene was an unarmed crew, in fact plainclothes officers who were armed only with PAVA incapacitated spray and extendable batons. They were told it was still a few minutes away before a taser unit was nearby and able to get to the Methodist church hall. It would be even longer than that before an armed police unit arrived. They decided, risking their own safety, to go inside the church hall because they knew that someone had been stabbed and required immediate medical attention. They got in, they found the defendant inside there, still holding the knife and on a mobile phone to a member of his family. They shouted for him to put his knife down. He did. The body-worn video was played to the court, and you saw the suspect, the defendant in this case, being arrested at that time. The prosecution's opening statement is continuing. We're told that this trial is due to last some 10 days.
Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Affairs editor. Now, she became an emblem of human collateral in geopolitical chess. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, finally being reunited with her family after 6 years of imprisonment in Iran, has been met with celebration following solitary confinement, numerous hunger strikes, retrials and failed campaigns by no fewer than 5 foreign secretaries. But what changed that finally secured her freedom? We know the UK has agreed to pay a 40-year-old £400 million debt, having previously argued that any exchange of money vindicated hostage-taking. We also know that the UK is having to go cap in hand to the Middle East in search of fuel in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Nazanin's release coincides with an edging ever closer to the revival of the Iran nuclear deal scrapped by Donald Trump, but once again facing potential resolution following 11 months of negotiations. Far from the story of one incredibly brave woman is a bigger narrative of shifting global relationships. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe spoke earlier today for the first time after being released from being imprisoned in Iran for 6 years. Here's what she had to say.
I have been in prison for 6 years. There are so many other people, we don't know their names, who have been, suffering in prison in Iran. So I think the justice in Iran does not have any meaning, because in worst case scenario, you are, being given the unfair trial. If you're lucky, then you'll be picked up by a kind of semi-fair judge, but in most cases, you're not being lucky. The journey back home was tough. I grant what Richard said, to thank the Foreign Secretary. I do not really agree with him on that level. I'm going to tell you that because I have seen 5 Foreign Secretaries changed over the course of 6 years. That is unprecedented given the politics of the UK. I love you, Richard. Respect whatever you believe. But I was told many, many times that, we're going to get you home. That never happened. So there was a time that I felt like, do you know what? I'm not even going to trust you, because I've been told many, many times that I'm going to be taken home, but that never happened. I mean, how many foreign secretaries does it take for someone to come home? 5. It should have been one of them eventually. So.
Well, joining me now is the Executive Director at the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza. I mean, 5 foreign secretaries, Nazanin said it herself there, a 40-year-old debt and the Iran nuclear deal. Why is she released now? What's behind this?
Well, I think you've sort of hinted already, Alex, with the reality that we paid a fat load of money to release her, and therefore did, of course, break this taboo about paying for hostages to be released, which will no doubt encourage more hostages to be taken so that they can get more money. And indeed, the Iran nuclear deal is on the table. We know at the moment that big concessions are being made to Iran with very little to come the other way. It looks like Tehran has probably gone, actually, let's encourage those concessions. Let's show how wonderfully moderate we are by accepting a large sum of money to release a hostage we've illegally seized and kept. So that really, I think, sums up what's going on.
How right do you think the UK government is to do that? I mean, of course, no one's suggesting that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe deserved to be banged up in prison in Iran for 6 years, far from it, and it's wonderful news that she is back home. But is there a risk here that we may have conceded too much, given the shifting tides because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a looming fuel crisis?
Yes, I mean, I think, look, it's wonderful she's back. She should never have been taken in the first place. The whole case was a travesty of justice. But as she pointed out, just one of many travesties of justice that have occurred in Iran. And the reality is that we have therefore poured money into the pockets of a regime that jails people with, lack of due process, which has no interest in human rights, tortures people, kills them. We've done this because maybe we think everyone else is looking at Russia as well. And we've gone, it's an opportune time to come out. But the trouble is that you then embolden a regime like that. If you're saying £400 million basically for 2 hostages, that's pretty good business, I'd have thought.
And is this going to leave us in a perilous situation down the line? Are we not just sort of putting our eggs in a different, or albeit equally perilous basket?
If we think Iran is the answer to our energy problems, that is a big no-no. I mean, as you say, Iran has for years already shown its aggression in the Middle East. It's shown its ability to destabilize the Middle East. It has shown its propensity to attack British targets. So the idea that we can, transfer energy in some way, shape or form from Russia to Iran, well, it's really like the devil in the deep blue. We've got the 2 very bad options here. Much better is to obviously look at alternative sources down the line. We've got to obviously make initial deals with people we might not want to make deals with, but Iran is probably the worst person or worst country you could make a deal with to replace anything from Russia.
Dr. Alan Mendoza from the Henry Jackson Society, thank you ever so much. Now, briefly, Christopher, what do you think about this? Government celebrating a win on this for obvious reasons. It's wonderful to see Nazanin back home, but it's a bit of a difficult situation and raises a lot of questions.
Well, what changed was Liz Truss decided and found this to be a legitimate debt owed for tanks from back in the 1970s that weren't paid because of the Iranian Revolution, as far as I remember. And that's what changed. So the money was paid on the same day of the release, and Alan Mendoza makes the connection. Others are making that same connection. But I think it's hard not to be gladdened by the sight of Nazanin speaking to us. And I think that was missing from that discussion. I mean, there was a family. I was watching them having a cup of tea today in House of Commons, and it was really deeply moving seeing them having a normal family life. And I think it just shows that the news is so grim, but there is always hope at the end of it. And perhaps that's what we should be talking about today as well.
Yeah, no, the human story is fantastic. It's great to have her back. Christopher, it's also been fantastic having you joining me today. Insightful as always. Let's have you back again soon.
Yeah.
That's all I've got time for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time tomorrow, 2 o'clock, of course. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first, there's time for a quick peek at the weather forecast. Bye-bye from me.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. A cloudier day compared to what many of us saw at the weekend, but staying bright and dry for most of us, and it will be a little warmer in the south as well. Areas of cloud are moving in from the west and from the south. That cloud thick enough in 1 or 2 spots to give the odd shower, for example, through parts of Wales and the Midlands. But for the vast majority, it's dry. Despite the extra cloud in the sky, it's bright and temperatures higher in the south compared to the weekend, 15 to 17 or even 18 Celsius, Cardiff to London. I think more like low teens further north for Northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Then through the evening, a few showers arriving from the south. they'll be very hit and miss. Most places will miss them, and they'll be fleeting anyway where they do occur. Away from the showers, there'll be a few clear spells, especially towards the northeast where a touch of frost is possible, and one or two fog patches in one or two spots as we start off Tuesday. But otherwise, it stays fine. High pressure is sitting to the east and low pressure to the west, and that's how things remain effectively through the rest of the week. So generally, that means that it's going to stay fine and increasingly sunny once again once Tuesday's early showers have pushed away. The cloud builds again into the afternoon, particularly across parts of the Midlands, Wales, Northern England and Southern Scotland. And once more, the odd shower is possible. But for the vast majority, sunny spells, certainly a brighter day in many spots, and a warmer day. 19 or 20 Celsius is possible somewhere like London or Cambridge, and those mid to high teens extend up towards Northern England and Southern Scotland. Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland seeing low teens. Into Tuesday evening, we'll see clear spells once again, and that leads us on to a sunny day on Wednesday, virtually across the board. A bit more cloud in the north on Thursday and Friday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing.